Okay, so this is the key to section 7.5 part B. And in this worksheet, you're solving rational equations. Now, in these rational equations, you'll notice that this denominator is a monomial, that's x. This denominator is x minus 5, so you can't factor that one. Now, this right here, this binomial, you can factor out an x. So in these rational expressions, you want to make sure before you find your restrictions, you want to make sure that you factor your denominators. Also, you need to factor your denominators before you find your LCD as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and factor this. I can factor out an x. So I have x times x minus 5. And then so basically to find your restrictions, you're going to set each factor equal to 0. So my first factor I see is x, and so I'm going to set that equal to 0, and x is already by itself. So there's one of your restrictions. So x not equal to 0 because 0 makes this denominator 0 and also makes this denominator 0 because 0 times whatever this is, negative 5, is 0. And you cannot divide by 0. Then you set your next factor equal to 0. So I'm going to have x minus 5 equals 0. So I get x equal 5. So 5 makes this denominator 0. It also makes this denominator 0 because when x is 5, 5 minus 5 is 0. 0 times 5 is 0. And you cannot divide by 5. And you go to the next one. This factor is x. You've already dealt with it. This factor is x minus 5. You already dealt with it. So these are the only two restrictions. Okay, now your LCD. So your LCD must include every factor in your denominators. So my first factor, which is the monomial, is x. There's only one factor of x here. There's one factor of x here. So I need one factor of x. My next factor is x minus 5. There's none here, one here, one here. So I need 1. So this is your LCD. Now remember, once you're solving this equation, so what you solve to solve the equation, one way to do this is to clear your fractions. So you can multiply both sides by this LCD. So this left side, though, has two fractions in it. So I'm going to go ahead and enclose that in parentheses. So I'm going to get x times x minus 5, the LCD, times the left side, and then equal the LCD, x times x minus 5, times the right-hand side, which is 2 divided by, and make sure you use the factored part. So it'll be x times x minus 5. Okay, so then you're going to get rid of these grouping symbols, the brackets that I've enclosed. And so I'm going to get the LCD times each of these fractions. So you got to have each fraction being multiplied by the LCD. So don't make the mistake and reduce this x with this x and distribute the x minus 5 because that's incorrect. Alright, so you're going to say x times x minus 5 times the first fraction minus the LCD times the second fraction equals, and then the right hand side, x times x minus 5 times 2 divided by x times x minus 5. Alright, now I'm going to reduce. So remember a while ago we said do not reduce this x with this x and distribute the x minus 5 because both of these right here have to multiply by x minus 5. So now you can reduce, and these x's now divide out. So you get 3 times x minus 5. So 3 times x minus 5 minus, now this x minus 5 divides out, and now you're left with 4 times x. So if you had made a mistake and factor out these x's, when you distribute x minus 5, you would have only been left with 4, and that's incorrect. It's supposed to be 4 times x. So 4x. Equal. And over here, these two factors divide out with these two factors, and you're left with 2. And now distribute the 3 here. I'm going to get 3x minus 15 minus 4x equal 2. And then combine like terms, I'm going to get a negative x minus 15 equals 2. And then adding 15 to both sides, I'm going to get a negative x equals 17. Now remember, This is, you're solving for x. This is negative x. So remember that's the same thing as saying negative 1 times x equals 17. So now you can do, since you're multiplying x by negative 1, you can divide by negative 1. And so negative 1 divided by negative 1 is 1. 1 times x is x, equaling negative 17. So that's your solution. Negative 17 is not a restriction. Okay, now, number 2. This denominator 2x minus 1, there's nothing you can do with that. You can't factor it. This binomial, same thing. You can't factor it. Now, this right here, this trinomial, I can factor as 2x, 3x. The last sign's negative. Remember that. The last sign's negative. These signs in here are different. One's positive, one's negative. And the only possibilities of 2 is 2 and 1. So we know we can't put the 2 here because then you would be able to factor out a 2, which meant this whole thing right here was divisible by 2. And it's not. So the 2 has to go here. The 1 has to go here. You want the larger of the outer and inner to be the positive, to be the middle sign. So that means that this has to be a plus symbol, this has to be subtraction. And so notice, always check yourself. Usually what's going to happen is these factors will be one of these or at least one of these. Not always the case, but usually is in this course. All right, so let's go ahead and find the restrictions. So my first factor I see is 2x minus 1. I want to find out where is this equal to 0, so I'm going to say equal to 0. And notice this is a linear equation, so I add 1 to both sides. And so I get, when I combine like terms, I get 2x equal 1, so x is a half. So my first restriction is that x cannot equal a half, because when x is 1 half, 2 times a half is 1, 1 minus 1 is 0. And you can't divide by 0. My next factor I see is 3x plus 2. I want to find out where that is 0. Alright, so I solve that linear equation. Combine like terms, subtract 2 from both sides. I get 3x equals a negative 2, so x is a negative 2/3. So there's another restriction. I go to my next factor, 2x minus 1, I've already taken care of it. I go to my next factor, 3x plus 2, I've already taken care of it. So those are your 2 restrictions. Now let's find the LCD. So the LCD must include every factor you see. So my first factor I see is 2x minus 1. There's 1 here, none here, 1 here, so I need 1. My next factor is 3x plus 2. There's 1 here, none here, 1 here, so I need 1. My next factor is 2x minus 1. I've already taken care of it. 3x plus 2, I've already taken care of it. So that's your LCD. Alright, so now we're going to multiply both sides by this LCD. And since this left side has 2 fractions, I'm going to put that in brackets or parentheses. So I'm going to have 2x minus 1 times 3x plus 2 times 5 divided by 2x minus 1 minus 7 divided by 3x plus 2, and that's going to equal the LCD times the right hand side. So times 9 divided by, and use the factored part, 2x minus 1 times 3x plus 2. Alright, now distributing, I'm going to get the LCD times each of those fractions. So remember, don't make the mistake and factor out these 2x minus 1s and distribute only the 3x plus 2. That's not correct. Alright, so 2x minus 1 times 3x plus 2 times the first fraction minus the LCD, 2x minus 1 times 3x plus 2 times the second fraction equal, and then this side here. So I'm just going ahead and rewrite it. 2x minus 1 times 3x plus 2 times 9 divided by 2x minus 1 times 3x plus 2. Okay, so now let's go ahead and reduce. So when I reduce, these factors here divide out, 2x minus 1 divide out, and you have 5 times 3x plus 2, 5 times 3x plus 2, minus, so you're subtracting. These factors divide out, the 3x plus 2, and you're left with 7 times 2x minus 1, 7 times 2x minus 1, equal. Over here, these two factors divide out with these two factors, and you're left with 9. Alright, now distributing, I get 5 times 3x is 15x. 5 times 2 is 10. A negative 7 times 2x is a negative 14x. A negative 7 times a negative 1 is a positive 7 equal 9. Combine like terms, 15x minus 14x is x. 10 plus 7 is 17. And then notice I went from a rational equation to, right here, a linear equation. So the next step I got to do is just subtract 17 from both sides. Combine like terms. I get x to be a negative 8. Now that is not a restriction. Assuming I did all this correct, this is a solution. Alright, number 3. Okay, number 3, you have these three denominators which you cannot factor. This is a monomial, this is a monomial, this binomial we can't do anything with. So let's find the restriction. So my restriction here, where you said each factor equal to 0. So my first factor is x. I want to find out when is that 0. Well, that's 0 when x is 0. So there's one of your restrictions. And always check yourself when you plug in 0 back into this denominator, into the variable x, you get 6 divided by 0. Over here, this factor x minus 1 equals 0. So where's this factor equal to 0? Well, that's equal to 0 when x equals 1. So there's your other restriction. Always check yourself. 1 minus 1 is 0. Here, that denominator, that factor does not include a variable. So you don't even do anything with it. There's no variable here. So those are the only two restrictions, 0 and 1. Okay, now your LCD, you're going to use this in your LCD though. So your LCD is going to be 4x times x minus 1. That's your LCD. Okay, so now you're going to multiply both sides by the LCD. So I get 4x times x minus 1 times these two fractions, 6 over x minus 9 over x minus 1, equal 4x times x minus 1 times the right-hand side, 1 over 4. Distributing, get rid of the brackets. I get 4x times x minus 1 times the first fraction minus 4x times x minus 1 times the second fraction, and that's equal to 4x times x minus 1 times a fourth. Okay, so now the next step is to reduce. So these factors of x divide out. So you get 4. This 4 times this 6 is 24. So you get 24 times x minus 1. So make sure you saw that. 4 times 6 is 24. Over here, the factors of x minus 1 divide out. So you get 4 times 9 is 36. So you get 36x. So minus 36x equal. Over here now, you got to be a little bit careful. The 4's divide out, but you have x times x minus 1. That's what you have. 1 times x minus 1 times 1 is x times x minus 1. Okay, so now distributing this, remember you have a polynomial times a monomial, you use the distributive property. So I get 24x minus 24 minus 36x equal, over here using the distributive property, x times x is x squared minus x times negative 1 is a negative x. Alright, combine like terms on the left side. I'm going to end up with a positive 24x and a negative 36x is a negative 12x. I get negative 12x minus 24 equal x squared minus x. Alright, now notice that this time I went from a rational equation to a quadratic. So these two here are quadratic equations, actually. All of these right here are quadratic equations. So to solve a quadratic equation, remember you're going to put this in standard form. Now since x squared has the positive coefficient on the right hand side, let's just bring everything to the right hand side. So I'm going to add 12x to both sides. And when I add 12x to both sides, combine like terms, this is 0, you're left with a negative 24 equal x squared. A negative x and a positive 12x is a positive 11x. And then adding 24 to both sides, a negative 24 and a positive 24 is 0. So I get 0 equals x squared plus 11x plus 24. Okay, now factoring this trinomial, I'm going to get x plus 8 times x plus 3 equals 0. And always check yourself. X times x is x squared. Positive 8 times a positive 3 is a positive 24. The outer is 3x, the inner is 8x, I get 11x. Now remember, using the zero factor property, you're going to set each of these equal to 0. So remember, the zero factor property says that when you have two or more factors whose product is 0, then one of them has to be 0. That's the only way you can get 0. Alright, so I'm going to say x plus 8 equals 0, and the other factor, x plus 3 equals 0. So notice I went from a quadratic equation to two linear equations using the zero factor property. And so I get x equal a negative 8, and here I get x equal a negative 3. And none of these are restrictions. So assuming I did all this correct, then these are your two solutions. So x equal a negative 8 and x equal a negative 3. So those are your solutions. Okay, so that's going to take care of the key to worksheet 7.5, part